T102, what are your impressions just starting off, entering this workshop? What do you know about it? Maybe you know nothing, maybe you know a little bit. What's the situation? Nothing?
When it first started, I actually taught a couple lessons, but there were so many errors it didn't go over well, and they're like, yeah, you're not teaching these anymore. Kids don't like it when you teach it. Cool.
Okay, fine. So you're here to kind of learn more about it then. So then, Mariah, when you were in the classroom for those few classes, what was your impression of the class? What was your objective when you were in there?
At the time, the objective was trying to just get through everything so they could have those scores for the parents to see. It was really hard trying to go in depth with the specific question types and trying to explain how to solve them. It was more like a race against time, trying to shove everything in with do they have speaking and writing?
So T101 is the reading listening and T102 is the speaking writing.
Yeah, the speaking writing, that was terrible because the kids were all so shy and it was really hard getting everyone to speak all at once. And then pulling out recordings and then having to play back the distracted kids talking, and they're just like, teacher, no, teacher, no. It's the program.
Okay, I see. Okay, so we'll talk about that. First of all, we'll start off just with the program T101. Okay, so the reading and listening. With T101, I like to think of the T being like a testing or a TOEFL environment. Okay, so when you see that T there, for me, when I'm in the classroom, it's making me think of like testing, similar with like an admissions class, and TOEFL. So in this case, the IBT TOEFL. Okay, so T101, we have two components of the class, a reading simulation and then a listening simulation. And that is your entire 3 hours in the class. Okay, so if we open up the reading sim, I can show you kind of the learning flow to begin with. In your syllabus, you're going to have obviously 13 lessons from week 1 to 13, and it's comprised entirely of simulation tests, right? So again, T for testing, or we're always working towards the TOEFL IBT because that's the testing, the standardized testing that we have our kids work towards here at T101. So simulation testing for the 13 weeks, and the structure of the class, you can see it here. Good morning, come in. Hi. See you guys. No problem. We're just getting started, so no worries. Okay, so the structure of the class, you can see it's broken down into a simulation test of the reading, and that will take 55 minutes. That's what it's recommending, 55 minutes. The review is half an hour. That means reading for an hour and a half, and then repeat, rinse, and repeat, listening for an hour and a half, essentially. So your 3 hours are an hour and a half of reading, an hour and a half of listening. Okay, and that's the whole thing. Now, I just want to get your impressions looking at this class structure, looking at a 55-minute simulation test for reading, followed by review, which is then followed by 55 or 50-minute simulation test of listening. At Dongtan, for example, with your students, what do you think that will be like in the classroom with your kids? Bored. They're going to feel bored? Okay. Yeah?
They're probably going to get stressed.
Okay, so
that's 2 tests they're going to have to do every week.
Okay, so now we have this wonderful combination of boredom meets stress, and your role as the instructor trying to negotiate that and make it so that, you know, they're not like banging their head against the desk for 3 hours being like, oh my gosh, get me out of here, right? So one thing I can tell you is that hopefully, and most likely in my experience, the students that will be in T101 or T102 are there for a specific goal. And that goal is to improve their IBT TOEFL testing scores. Okay, so when it comes to mid to high level or high level to master's program and beyond, there are certain TOEFL scores they need to receive in order to be eligible to enter that level. So maybe we have a student who's been sitting in Eagle and they just can't get those extra 10 points. They're always losing those points in the reading and listening section every single level up test. So maybe mom and dad say, okay, we're going to change it up. We're going to have you in the T101 class. Okay. So that's hopefully the scenario that your students who are going to be in that class are there with a specific goal in mind, okay? They want to improve their testing scores. And so something I recommend is in your first classes with your students in T101 or 102, during the login, the warm-up, the icebreaker, just kind of ask your students what their goal is. Why are you in this class? It could be very simple. Mom and dad told me to come here. Okay, right? That could be their answer. But I would kind of try and make a classroom objective or goal that you could even put up on your board and realize that our goal is we want to improve 5 points in the reading section and 5 more points in the listening section on our TOEFL test. And maybe that's something you can establish in your first classes, just so that when those simulation tests are going down, you can remind your students, okay, I know it's difficult, but we're working towards this, and kind of motivate them to a greater goal, okay? So that it's not just, 3 hours in the classroom that they don't want to be there. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the basic class structure. So it says here in the notes that less time should be given than the actual test in order to fit in more review time. So the test, I'll show you, it recommends, I think, like 60 minutes. You want to give less time than that. And here the syllabus recommends 55 or 50, depending. In practice, I've also lessened that as well, okay? Because when we see here, it says 60 minutes, but again, we want to reduce that for 3 passages and 45 questions, okay? So for me, always when I look at my syllabus, I think of it as the marathon. I use that analogy all the time, right? 13 weeks is the marathon. We're not running a short sprint, we're running a long race, okay? For my students to complete 45 questions in full every single week for the reading section and review for 30 minutes, all 13 weeks, they're gonna be pretty gassed, as you can imagine. It's going to be very overwhelming for them. So, this is a tip that I have and something that you can, I guess for Dongtan instructors or other school instructors, I guess run by your TMs, but something that we've done here at Songpa is to modify the amount of questions that you actually go over in the simulation test. And when modifying the 45 questions, picking maybe certain question types to focus on for that week, and again, building the skills week by week. Now I will say, I do know other schools where the thing is, they want the entire simulation done. And that's okay, that could be the case, but it's, again, just a recommendation. I can only give you like my experience as an instructor. For me, I've done it both ways. I've had a T101 class where it was essentially all master level students, and so the deal was, we're doing everything. That's what their parents wanted. That's actually what they wanted too. They needed that. And then there's been other times where I've been able to modify and reduce the amount of questions that we actually do in the simulation so that we have more time to review and more time to build the skills. Because, Mariah, what were you saying about like the skills in the classroom when you were reviewing?
It was really hard to go over every single skill because when I was teaching when it first came out, and the branch was like, okay, you have to do everything because the parents are going to see it and because we're going to follow it by the book because it's the first flagship thing. And granted, there were errors galore. And it was hard trying to target specific question types.
Right.
So what we wound up having to do was, okay, whatever question types there was a 50% error rate or higher, those are really the only ones we focused on.
Okay.
But those were all over the board in terms of what kind of question types they were.
Right, so it could be that essentially a lot of questions had 50% or lower. Have you guys used, who has taught an A2 class before? For people who've done A2, have you used that strategy before where it's like 50% or less you review in the classroom? Yes? And Megan, how did that go for you when you were doing it that way?
Went okay, I think.
Okay, so yeah, that's another way that you can do it when it comes to the half an hour review, is to review based off of 50% or lower, or that rate could even dependingly become increased, like maybe 75% or lower. Like if they really miss the question, then we're going to focus on it. But otherwise, also speak to your TMs about this entire 45 question situation and what your branch actually wants conducted, okay? Okay, so when we actually open up the SMART textbook, the lesson number 1, we enter into the first reading passage. Okay, so they have a reading passage here. In this case, it's 6 paragraphs, and when they continue on to the next page, this is when the actual passage questions begin. Okay, so you're going to notice this icon up here. This is something you've probably never seen before. Okay, and this icon, when I click onto it, it will become orange. And when it's orange, it means that I can actually scroll on this individual passage. So this is just an excerpt of the bigger passage that we saw before. So it's actually quite nice because instead of always having to use dual screen and go through the entirety of the passage, it points the kids to the section that they're actually needing to read from. And then the students have the same function. They can scroll on here and you can also scroll as well. When you go off of it, if you try to move, now you're annotating. Okay, so that means when I want to annotate, I'm in the gray, and when I want to move it around, I'm in the orange, so then I can, move around and annotate different things. Okay. Over here, I'll turn the light bulb off. This section here, number 1, this is obviously just where we have our question. Okay, so this is toggled with your actual scroll bar here, the one that we usually use when we're scrolling. Okay, so the scroll bar is only going to activate like moving the question side, and then in order to move this, you need to use the little orange on for the finger touch. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, and then one more function I guess I will point you to is when you go all the way to the bottom, you'll see this link. Have you seen this icon before? Maybe if anyone's taught F1 before, or EC levels? Yeah? Okay, so I said, do you know what it does? Absolutely. So when you click here, it actually links you back to the passage, and the kids have that function as well. Okay, so it looks the same for them. So then they could view like the passage in its entirety as well. Okay? So as we go through, you'll just see every single page here is going to be questions. Okay? All the way to 43, because this is 45 questions. So the last 3 questions, right, they're going to be one of these summary type questions where it's like, pick the 3 points that best summarize the passage, and then there's the last 3 questions. Okay, and so this is the material that you're using for that 55 minutes of the simulation. Okay, but I guess let's talk about, like Marno, have you ever done a simulation test in your classes before?
Not really. Alba and Eagle,
Okay.
C1 and C2, it's not really the same simulation test.
Okay.
Not really.
It doesn't have to be necessarily the same simulation, but during like a testing situation, the kids are doing the test, and what are you doing?
I'm just walking around seeing if anyone needs help.
Absolutely. You're walking around and proctoring. Does anyone do the same thing as Marno? I mean, yeah, that's all what we usually do, proctor, walk around, But then we can kind of imagine a classroom scenario where for effectively 2 hours almost, right? Or let's say, an hour and 40 minutes of your class, you essentially are just proctoring. You're sitting or standing or moving around quietly, assisting students maybe one by one, but the classroom is silent and you're kind of just sitting, standing, walking around, So how do you think that's going to feel for you even as an instructor? Amazing?
No.
No, maybe not so much. Okay, so this is another reason why I suggest that you, after this workshop, go back and, even for you guys, all Dong 10 instructors, if you guys are effectively going to run the T101, 102 program, kind of speak to TMs or BMs about modifying it a little bit. Because, again, if you can imagine 13 weeks worth of 3-hour classes where for almost 2 hours, you are just like a figure in the room, a silent, proctoring test administrator. Again, the students, sometimes they need that. As I said, I have done that in the past with my more so like master's level students who were really there to do the dirty work and do the test questions on their own and work through it. But it's also been conducted for me other ways where you have more freedom to kind of modify how many questions you're answering. Okay. How about A2 High? Has anyone done A2 High? No, you guys are attending all those new workshops this week. Okay. It's kind of similar with A2 High. A2 High has simulations like this as well. They're not as long. They usually are for about 20 minutes. But again, or 30 minutes. I know that some schools, like for example my school, does modify the amount of questions we go through in that 30-minute testing simulation section in order to have greater reviews, more time, more detail. So just keep that in mind, okay? So I want to go back to our first page here and take a look at what our syllabus says about the components, okay? So with the components of the T101 class, there is a review test component, but that one is optional, okay? And so this review test is essentially the vocabulary words that they learned in the previous lesson from their C learning, okay? And then you're doing like a matching activity. I think it takes about 3 minutes with the students. They're doing a matching activity. And then there is ranking, and those scores get collected and then uploaded to the MERP. Okay, but that one is optional. It isn't always conducted. You'll have to see what your school does in that case for a review test. However, moving on to component B, this is the structure of the class, right? The reading and the listening simulations. So again, we're taking a simulation that reflects the TOEFL reading and listening type questions. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind is that students must have earphones for this class. Okay, this needs to be a class rule that you establish on the very first day of class. They all have to have earphones. Okay, so it's really, really important for this class, especially because it is a simulation test class, right? They need the earphones. So do you guys have any tips that you've done in order to make sure that every single student has earphones every single week? Okay, I have a tip for you then. Something that I do in my class is at the beginning, if I know on my schedule I have 2 T101 classes, what I'm going to do is get 2 big Ziploc baggies, and I bring them and just label them for like maybe my Thursday night, Friday night. And then I tell the kids, you need a pair of earphones for this class. Like, they are going to stay in this classroom. They are for this class. For the next 13 weeks, they're staying here in this bag, and we're going to use them every single week. And then I get a sheet of those little like white office stickers, and I write their name onto the office sticker and like fold it like a little tab around the earphone, and then just, wrap them up and keep them all in the bag, and they're all labeled with a name tag for the kids. And I just tell them, like, tell your mom and dad, this is what you need for the class. Like, you need, like even at Daiso, you can get $1 earphones, Chunwan, like it'll be okay. They should be able to bring earphones that they can just keep. It's not enough to just be like, oh, the earphones you use for your music, like bring them every time, because what do you think's gonna happen? They're gonna forget. They're kids, they're gonna forget. They're gonna leave them at home, or, they're gonna be like, oh, teacher, my earphone is broken, my headphone's not working, like, you're gonna then end up wasting your time dealing with all of that earphone nonsense. So I would just recommend this kind of Ziploc bag system. That's what I started doing, and having them keep them in the classroom specifically for the lesson. Okay? It gives you some options here, like have spare earphones. That's pretty good. I always have like 2 pairs spare, just like I have spare chargers. I don't know about you guys. Do you have spare earphones or chargers in your classroom? Chargers? Yeah, okay. However, like if I have 15 students in my class and like 5 of them are like, no earphones, well, I don't have 5 extra pairs, you know what I mean? So maybe a few extra pairs is always just good practice, but again, I like my Ziploc bag system better. Yeah, that's number 2, right? Collect them and hold their earphones. It also says that you could just use the MP3s, because a lot of the MP3s are actually on Drive or on the FTP, so you could just play the MP3s off of the tab and the TV to the class, but this one is not recommended. Okay? This is not the way we want the class to be structured. Earphones is much better. I think option C is like worst case scenario. Okay. Someone has stolen your Ziploc bag full of earphones and they've gone missing and you don't know what to do, and so, okay, let's use option C. Yeah? Okay. Okay, then that being said, what we need to do in terms of proctoring with the listening, it's very important that the students just listen to the questions and the passages one time. Okay, and so that means as we're proctoring, it's going to be silent, right? They're doing their test, they're taking notes. As you're proctoring, just be vigilant and make sure you don't see your kids trying to like rewind any of the sections. They should just listen one time through, okay? The thing is, the way that this test goes, once, and I'll show you at the tech sections coming up, once the students open it, it does actually kind of play automatically. So if they move to another page, like if they're doing page number 1 and after 10 seconds they just click right to page number 2, that audio is now finished for them. That means that the audio will stop and they cannot replay it. They couldn't go back to page 1 and try it again. So that's something that you should also, I guess, go over with your students. Let them know that they have to let it play in full all the way through and they only get one chance, and once they turn the page, it's done, right? Just like it would be in a test scenario. The question plays and it's finished and we don't get to go back and try again. Okay, so we're simulating that test environment. Okay. Right, so your methodology here is really simple that they provide you in the syllabus. Set the timer, proctor while they do the activity, and when the timer is up, collect the test scores, and then those will be uploaded to the MERP, okay? And I'll actually show you what that looks like, but it kind of uploads automatically and it awards medals. There are medalists like gold, silver, bronze for the top scoring second best and third best students. And all their scores just automatically collect, and then when you press upload, it just sends to the MERP. Okay, but that's effectively all the methodology that's provided to you in the syllabus. But we're going to talk about ways to kind of modify and improve this because, again, I just feel like if you are only doing this all 13 weeks, like you guys already said, your students are going to get bored, they're going to feel overwhelmed, you're probably going to get bored and feel overwhelmed, and so we can talk about what we can do to modify it a little bit for you guys. Okay, so that's the methodology for the test-taking section, the simulation test. That's the 55 or 50 minutes. After that finishes, the next thing we want to do is obviously to review. Okay, and like you guys said, we want to review the weakest questions with the students. If they all got 100% or 90% of them have it right, it's not necessary to review. Okay, so when we do the review of the questions, we want to reinforce and go over and outline the reading strategies and the way to answer the questions. Okay, so actually on the FTP and maybe even in your own school's drive, there are usually some justifications that are already pre-made and provided for more difficult questions. So that might mean a more difficult question could be like a sentence summary type or a sentence insertion or maybe an inference. Some of those are already prepared. And you could print those out actually and have that as part of your prep, and you're even able to distribute those to your students and have them have like a physical copy with a perfect justification of the more difficult questions. But as you know, like have you ever done a C1 class where your kids missed a main idea question? Has it ever happened to you? Okay. So Marno, what do you usually do in that case?
I would just take it back to the passage if I see like all of them missed it completely.
Mm-hmm.
Like go over it with them again and like then try to explain how to get that answer rather than just leaving them to find it again on their own.
Right, absolutely. And so that's what you'll do in this class too, is the same strategies, but I guess even a more simple, or what Changdam would deem like the easier questions, like main idea, right? That's something that's a little easier compared to the inferences and the others. Students still miss those questions sometimes, okay? Especially when we get into these more difficult, high-level IBT TOEFL-like passages. there are trick answers, right? There are answers that seem right except for one word, and that's the word we have to pick up on, and your students might answer that way. And so when it comes to these justifications that are actually like Cheongdam wide and available to you guys on the FTP, it's usually not enough to just be like, oh, okay, these are the weak questions, I already have justifications, I don't need to worry, my kids will get the detail question right, because I've had such a mixed bag. Sometimes everybody gets the inference, the inference is 100%, and then we all miss the main idea. So you just have to be prepared to justify or explain really everything. Okay, so when it comes to the methodology for reviewing, first of all, let them just kind of look at their score. Once they finish the test and submit, a page will pop up that says My Score, and it will show them all of their questions and answers and their total score. And then on your page, it will have the medalists. So that's where it'll have like the gold, silver, bronze that they'll be able to see. Okay, and then you can click onto View Weakest Questions, and that's where you'll see the percentage of the students who answered it wrong. Okay, and yeah, usually if 50% answered it wrong, we could start to want to review that, but you'll have to kind of feel out your class, because maybe of the 45 questions, it could be that 25 of them were 50-50. And you're not going to have time in half an hour to review 25 questions, so that's when you could bump up the percentage to more like 60% of the class or 75% of it having it wrong. Okay? Yes, okay, and then obviously we'll go through this in a little more detail, but the review process of eliciting answers from the students and eliciting the justification, having them justify their answers through questions that you ask to the students. Okay? I'll speak about this maybe a little bit later. What I'll do then is show you what the medals and kind of score system looks like, and I need to open T102 for that. Any questions so far, you guys? Okay. I think I put it in speaking. Yeah, okay, so this kind of shows us a little bit of what it's going to look like actually in the classroom. So when the lesson starts and when you open up or open into like the reading or whatever component it is that you're teaching for T101 or T102, there's going to be a start test button that looks like this, okay? And in order to end the lesson, you just press end test. Once you press start, this will change to an end test button, and you'll see the time elapsing, and you can end it whenever you need. Okay, and then once you press end test, this will automatically, again, like I said, collect the answers from the students. Okay, let's see. I know, I'll show you on here. I'm missing that screenshot, you guys, but that's okay. Okay, so the way that the scores look is going to be like this. That's fine. Okay, so on the Students tab, my score page that I talked about, I know this is a little bit small, but you'll be able to see this in the actual guide by yourself. Here, it's all of their questions, the 3 different passages or the 3 different listenings, and then what their actual score was. It also shows them like the total score with the percentage. And then on your tab, it's going to say medalists, right? And then it shows the top placing student, the second place, and the third place. And then this is medalists, and this other tab beside it is going to say the weakest answers. And when you click onto this one, that's when we're going to see the percentage of the questions that were wrong and which ones were the weakest. And that's what's going to help you gauge what question types you're going to be reviewing. Okay? So that's the tech for starting, ending the test, and then looking at your scores. There's also some different kind of tech when it comes to the, I don't want speaking now. Let's do this one. Okay, so any kind of listening autoplay in a practice test that has any kind of listening section, the instructor can actually press onto the image that's going to be embedded in the lesson, and that's where the audio bar will come from. So for you guys, when you open up your lesson textbook, I think for me, the first time I did, I was like, wait, where is the listening? Like, there's no play button. I don't know where to find it. It's actually with the picture. Okay, so when you click onto it, that's where you would see a listening section. And then you've seen this one before in your C1 or C2 classes, then the audio file will open up at the bottom for you. Yeah, okay, fine, that part we'll talk about in T102. Now, what I do want to talk about, we'll kind of flip back to the 101, is the strategies. Now, for you guys, how much work have you done on your own or with your TMs going over reading and listening question types and strategies? Maybe I can go one by one and you can kind of let me know. Like for Ian, how much work have you done on your own looking at the types or with your TM reviewing?
I usually do it by myself, just during prep.
Okay.
About 30 minutes to an hour.
Okay, cool. Not so much, okay. And then Allie, it's Allie, yeah?
Yeah.
Allie, how about you?
Not a lot.
Not a lot so far, no problem. Megan?
I guess on my own bit, but yeah, not a whole lot.
Okay, and Mariah?
By myself, not ever really with the TMs.
Okay, no worries. Marnu? Brand new, no worries. And what's your name?
Madeline.
Madeline, how about you?
Brand new.
Brand new.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So that's cool. We all have kind of like our own interpretation of those reading questions and listening questions and our own way to prep it. But what I actually want to do is, because a class like this is so dependent on reading question types and listening question types, I want to give you a little, I guess, like crash course of, for me, with my team members, what I usually go over with them and the kind of guide that I use to help them out, okay? So, let's take a look. If I go here. Okay, now, this is something that you can find on the FTP. It might actually already be uploaded to your school's own Google Drive, and if you can't find it in either of those places, you could always send like faculty human resources at chumdum or gmail.com an email, or you could just, I'm sure your branch TMs or BM would be able to find this for you. It's called an IBT reference manual, okay? And this is like a standard manual that we use at all different schools, okay? This reference manual is actually for IBT classes, and this isn't an IBT class, right? This is T101, T102, but the question types and the methodology is really the same because IBT is a TOEFL class, and so is this, really, in a sense. They just have different structures. But this manual is going to have different strategies for you to go over the question types, and it gives you a lot of really great tips, okay? So, we'll start by talking about reading section, okay? Now, something that you want to do in your first lessons with your students when it comes to the reading passages, before you just open up that test and give it to them for those 55 minutes, I like to spend time reviewing with my students this skill of skimming and outlining. Now, hopefully, we've just had C1, C2. Maybe they've come from a C1 class, right? So they've had some practice with the skimming and the summary and outlining, okay? But we want to make sure they understand how to skim, okay? So we need to remind the students that they're reading quickly, first of all, right? And that they need to start by identifying things like the title and annotating clues on the title, right? Skimming the first paragraph using that Z formation, and the Z lets us know that the first and the last sentence are the most important in most cases, right? Looking for transition words or repeated words And then, yeah, again, it says the first and the last sentence. Those skills from a C1 class, we just want to kind of review them and summarize them and just remind our students, do that once our test starts, okay? They're trying to now apply those skills in a test simulation. So I would take a few minutes at the beginning of class to review this. And then we'll get into the different question types, okay? So this is something for you guys that for me, when I teach the class, I print this out and I rely on this for my prep. I do everything with this manual because it makes it really, really simple and kind of foolproof. So when it comes to like a vocabulary question in context, it gives you all the steps on how we can answer a vocab question, okay? So we need to use context clues like transitions, structural clues like the different structure in the passage, and then the be verbs. These will all give clues, okay? And then it makes it really nice and simple. It shows you, even though instructors, like for us, we know which word is going to be similar because we understand the English definitions. That's not what we're emphasizing with the students. We're not trying to teach them to understand these two words are synonyms because in a test, they're not going to know that really at all, you know? We want to teach them to use the context clues. Okay, so I'll show you. Let's find a vocab question. I think, yes, number 4. Okay, so the word perceiving in the passage, closest in meaning to, right? And then our 4 answers. Okay, so in this case, right, the answer is C, but let's say you had, 80% of your students here, and then 10, and then 10. What would you guys do in order to justify this question? What would be your steps? If everybody misses it, what would you do to lead them to the question in the passage, the answer in the passage? Marno?
I've done it with like lower levels, obviously not masters before, but I would usually, because I had this before that no one got the answer right, and I would say like, just swap that word in, and does it make sense to you? But it was a lot easier words than this.
Okay.
So I would just tell them, okay, replace that word, read the sentence out loud. How does it sound? Does it sound fine? Does it make sense to you? That's what I did. But this will be a little harder, I guess. Right,
if they're trying all of these, verbs and they all sound to these second language speakers, oh, that sounds right. Okay, but it's a good tip. Definitely, that's something you can try. Mariah?
Depending on what their levels are and if they actually understand the vocabulary words, I'll have them ask themselves, okay, so what does approving mean? Oh, you like it, so you like reality. Does that make sense? Not really. Distribute, what does that mean? Giving stuff out, does that make sense? Do you give out reality? No. Visualizing, that would be harder because they're like, well, you see it,
right?
But is reality something only that you see? It's also something that you hear, you feel, you smell, all your senses. This is only targeting one thing.
Right.
Grasping, most of it is just, you're holding it in your hand, not partially, but it's also having a good understanding of something.
Yeah. So I think in this case, we always want to tend to lean on having the students understand what those words mean in order to justify. And I think if you tried, for me, if 80% of my students answered visualizing, it usually gives me an indication that they probably know what that word means. Because students are going to want to answer something that they understand, they know what it means, so then I could do like what Mariah said and ask them, okay, what does this word mean? Seeing. Can you see, if they have difficulty, are they going to be able to see reality? Can they see that? No. Okay, so then we could eliminate. All right, and then I could try it with maybe another one of them that I'm able to eliminate, a word they might know, like approving, and then eliminate in that way as well. The thing is, there's not always going to be context clues that your students are going to be able to understand. Like in this case with this passage, what we're focusing on is that the context of they have difficulty doing it well, doing it accurately, okay? So which one are they going to have difficulty with? if this said understanding, that would be obviously so much easier. Grasping in this case is understanding, but if they don't know that, we don't want to just tell them grasping means understanding. So what I like to do is, even in this case, if we can get it to a 50-50, I tell my kids all the time in T101, this is your ideal situation. This is what you want with every single question, because to be honest, with a question like this, there's no teacher to help you out to guide you to what the word means. And 50-50, they could even just pick, you know, and they have 50% chance of getting it right. So even in your review of the questions, if you can narrow it down as a class to a 50-50, I don't want you to feel like, oh, I'm stuck because I didn't get it down to the exact answer every single time. Because, you know, in these tests, they're harder, they're higher level, and sometimes your students aren't always going to be able to eliminate down to the correct answer every single time. But 50-50 is kind of something I use with my team members to, I guess, remind them like that is successful as well. Because in a standardized test, again, 60 minutes, 45 questions. That is not a lot of time. They are going quickly. They should be going quickly, right? In that fast-paced scenario, 50-50 is pretty good, right? I have a good likelihood that I'm going to get correct answers if I can get it to a 50-50. So this is actually a test-taking skill, right? We don't always have to spend all our time getting it down to the exact right answer. 50-50 is kind of, I guess, a bit of a mantra you can use in your classroom and during review as well. Any questions about that? Okay, so that's like for vocab questions. Some of them that I think, like reference questions, I think we've likely seen before. Factual, negative fact, rhetorical purpose. Are these familiar to you guys? Yeah? Okay. I think that some of the ones that will start to become a little more unfamiliar is like down here. So sentence insertion, summarization, and categorization. Have you taught any of these before? Mariah?
Yeah.
Megan? Okay, for some of us it is brand new, so then I really recommend that you have this manual with you, because for me even, like, I mean, I'm a native English speaker, I've done English tests before, I thought like, oh okay, I know how to answer this question, but do I know how to teach children how to answer the question and to understand it? That was a whole different thing for me, you know what I mean? This manual was really helpful because it just gives you all of the steps and shows you what types of questions that you have, okay? So for sentence insertion, this is when you're going to have a question that fits logically into the paragraph. So it will look, I think like this, yes. So look at the passage, right, and say logically where will this sentence best fit. And then in our passage, we have A, B, C, and D, 4 different places the sentence could go, okay? So the steps with this are the context clues, okay? Now, in this sentence, there are clues that are going to help me review with the students why it belongs in the place that it does. So the first thing to look out for is something like transitions, right? In such cases, okay, well, that means that whatever came previously, that's what this is referring to, that case, that situation, okay? Also, we have here the patient, right? That means that noun is letting me know that we've probably previously seen the patient mentioned, okay? So, A, right? Logically, that's what we're doing with our students. It logically cannot be A in such cases. Can I find out what cases? No. So then we're eliminating, okay? So you're using context from the sentence and then figuring out where to fit it in the passage, okay? And then the manual actually breaks it down really nicely. It gives you all these tips about general statements that come before a certain idea, and then a specific statement comes after, and all these kinds of steps that you can work into your prep. But I mean, we don't have time to go through all of it right now, but I just wanted to touch on that one. We'll go into summarization, okay? So a summarization question is like the one we checked out at the very, very end of this test. 43. It's essentially a passage summary, okay? So we have to make a summary of the passage, right? So there are 3 answer choices that will summarize the most important ideas from that passage, and you have to select the answer choices in the order they appear. Now this is very important because if we're basing it on the order, that means that this is likely body paragraph 2, body paragraph 3, body paragraph 4, where the answers are coming from. And the sentences that best summarize the passage are going to be main idea, paragraph 2, main idea, paragraph 3, main idea, paragraph 4. And that's why that skimming and outlining step is so important in the beginning. When they first see the passage, they have to know how to skim and annotate and accurately find those key things that we drill in that Cheongdam pizza with the topic, thesis, main idea. We see all of that now. There's a purpose. The test-taking purpose is really there, okay? So this 2, 3, 4, when I'm justifying with my students, what I like to do is I literally, on the board or on my tab, I make that pizza and I go through it with the students, asking them those leading questions. What was our topic? What did the thesis say? And what were the 3 ideas that supported the thesis? What did you read about in paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4? We identify that first, and now I'm like, okay, well, which answers fit in our pizza? Which ones belong? Okay, and then I guess like 43 is B. Okay, this one broke the rule. One thing you will see, B doesn't have it, but sometimes it will have a transition word that lets you know that it's fitting. If it's a listing transition, a lot of the TOEFL passages use listing to be a little kinder to the students during this activity, but in this case, no. This one, I guess, is using time transitions. It's following chronologically through history, so our indications would be like the early society and once, and that's how we could know it was the first main idea. Okay, and then you would work your way through. Does this make sense? Yeah? Okay, and the last one I want to tell you guys about briefly is the categorization. Okay? Okay, so this is when students need to put the correct characteristics of a group and put it into a table. Okay, so there's usually multiple answers, and this might actually be in the listening section. Let me flip back. Yes, I'll open up our listening, and I'll show you the categorization question in listening. Maybe at the end here. Yeah. Okay, so they have to categorize these different ideas. Where were they spoken about in the listening? Like under what category? Was it when we were talking about physical failures, or a failure during process, or an error or failure of attitude? These are 3 different categories that were spoken about in the listening, and then how can we categorize these 3? What area do they belong under? Okay. This one, in the case of listening, this is why listening note-taking structure is so important. Okay, so that's what I want to show you now quickly is for the listening note-taking. Who has taught note-taking with their students before? Okay, and Mariah, what do you usually do with your students in order to teach them note-taking?
Emphasize that they have to use abbreviations, use a lot of symbols.
You do like ASK?
Pardon?
Oh, sorry. Do you do like abbreviations, symbols, keywords?
I don't use that specifically,
Okay,
but that
okay.
one, so I don't use it that formally, but I wind up doing that same thing, and I also emphasize the fact that, or I'll do model notes on the board, and most of the time it'll be, teacher, we can't read your notes. Yeah, but I can, and that's what matters. I can't read your notes. Can you understand your notes? Yeah, that's what matters.
Okay, good. Okay, so I guess in C1, something you touched on and that I use is ASK, this acronym, ASK, and it's just abbreviate, symbols, keywords. And I use that one all the time. We'll still use that for sure in this listening section, but here, a skill we now want to focus on more with the students is the organization of their notes. Because a lot of the TOEFL or the T101 listening questions will be based off of, you have to identify a certain order in your notes. If your notes, I have students, if they have a lined page, they take notes across the lines as if they were writing a paragraph. And then when it's like, which category did these 3 statements belong under? They don't have any idea. How could they? Their notes are just a giant paragraph, right? So now something we want to really work on in this class is the skill of the organization in our notes. And something that I use, I guess I want to show you guys 2 things. I'll just do it on the board quickly. The first thing I do, because I just use it all the time, is the logical hierarchy. So I have them take notes in this shape or following this line. Something else that I do, like this, I do kind of like a column system. Anything that's related to the topic goes here. Anything that's related to the thesis goes in this column. Anything related to main ideas goes in here. And anything related to major details goes in here. And that means, as the students are taking notes, they are moving across the page and working their way down the page as the listening plays. And then, when they're looking at their questions, everything's kind of sorted already for them in columns. And this skill takes a little bit of time to develop. If they've never seen it before, it feels uncomfortable for them to kind of jump in between these columns. But I do really encourage you at least trying it with your students. If it's something that you feel will work for you, I highly recommend it because this makes answering the questions so much easier. Okay? This is for a lecture, right? When it's a 5-minute lecture and we're listening to the lecture the whole way through, we want to do it like this. We also want to encourage our students to use like numbers throughout, or even they might have to make charts within the columns, further organization. And then obviously in the listening we also have conversations. So some of them are lectures and some of them are conversations. Ian, what would you do with your students during a conversation? How would they take their notes?
What do you mean by conversation?
So when the listening file is a conversation, a professor is talking with a student and they're talking back and forth.
I haven't had those.
Oh, okay.
I've done just
No problem.
middle
Yeah.
and lower levels.
That's fine. Has anyone had a scenario like that where there was a conversation? Okay, so what would you do?
Split teacher, student.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that case, we just want to do a T-chart. And then you could have speaker 1 and speaker 2, or at the beginning it actually says, listen to a professor speaking to a student. And that's when they would then put in the 2 sides, and then they take notes on either side and again work their way down the T-chart back and forth. And then that way their notes are more organized. And for me, you guys, I make this like a rule in my class. Because if I just try and give them the option, like try this, I still get my kids who write paragraph notes. And it's just like such a, I mean, their notes could be really good actually, the way they're abbreviating or the keywords they're writing down could be really, really great. But as far as the organization, they are just lost with it. And then when it comes to the questions, they miss points that they maybe could have had if they were using this organization system. Okay, so whatever it is that you're going to use, find an organization note-taking system that you want to use in your classroom, and I would enforce it as rather like a rule from the day 1 during listening section. Okay. And this guide, you guys, also then goes over all of the different listening question types as well. So listening question types are going to be really similar to the reading question types. There are a few that are different. The two that we don't usually see or really ever see during reading is function and attitude. Okay, so attitude, I'll speak about this one. It just is like, what is the speaker's attitude when they say this? Or what did the speaker mean when they said this? And the students actually have to listen for their tone of voice or kind of indication of in what type of attitude was the speaker presenting this information. Were they supporting it, or were they against it, or were they feeling disappointed? And that the students have to listen and then identify what was the attitude. So obviously we don't have that in a reading. And then function, this one is like the function of what was said. So it's kind of like a purpose reading question. What was the function of the speaker talking about this specific portion? Why did they talk about Renaissance paintings? What was the function of talking about Renaissance? Was it to give an example? Was it to give a definition? And then there's some answers like that. So these two are different, maybe something you've not seen before. So I would check these ones out in the reference manual as well. Okay. Yeah, and then actually, other than that, like with the listening, you guys, the formatting is exactly the same, right? So this is like your landing page. It lets them know they're listening to 2 conversations, 2 discussions, 2 lectures, the amount of time they have. Here it says you may take notes. I always change this to you must take notes. We have to take notes. And then again, once you start the test, it all just plays automatically. Okay? And they need their headphones for when they start the test. Any questions about that? Okay, so that's T101 sorted. Let's take a break now, and then we'll start again for 102.